A question that haunted me. Was I really too much, or were they simply too small for my depth? I was never too much for the right person. I was only too much for those who were never enough. The silence that answered everything. There are questions that scream, and then there are those that whisper, whispers that echo in the hollow chambers of a broken heart. Mine was simple. Was I too much? Too sensitive? Too emotional? Too soft? Too deep? I asked it in the quiet, after they left my message unread, after they replied with a single word text to a soul I poured out. I asked it when they said, "You're so intense," when they laughed off my tears, when they walked away while I was still reaching out. They didn't have to say it. Their absence said everything. The ocean they never learned to swim in. They wanted warmth, so I gave them fire. They wanted peace, so I gave them truth. But truth can be messy, and fire can burn. They dipped their toes into my ocean, but never once tried to swim. They stood on the shore of my heart and said, "This is too much." But it wasn't too much. It was just too deep for someone who only knows how to float. How I began to shrink to be loved, so I whispered instead of speaking. I tiptoed through conversations, hoping not to disturb their comfort. I apologized for feeling too deeply. I apologized for needing to be seen. I even apologized for my own heartbeat. I thought maybe if I became a little quieter, a little smaller, a little less, they would finally stay. But the truth? They weren't leaving because I was too much. They were leaving because they had so little to give. Their love couldn't breathe where my soul lived. They wanted a version of love that didn't shake the ground, but I was the earthquake. They wanted something soft and manageable, but I was the storm. Wild, sincere, unfiltered, and they couldn't handle that, not because I was wrong, but because they were never built to hold something real. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of their reflection in my love, because I loved like a mirror, and they couldn't face what they saw. The moment I stopped apologizing for my depth, I thought the depth was the problem, but now I know the problem was their fear of drowning. I was not too much. They were too little, too afraid, too unready. So now I choose to unlearn the lie that my heart needed editing to be worthy, the lie that my soul was a burden because the right ones won't ask me to shrink. They'll dive in and call it beautiful. Are you shrinking your soul to fit into places you were never meant to stay? The invisible wounds. Loving wasn't supposed to hurt like this. The wounds hidden in silence are often the deepest. They never raised their voice. They never called me names. They just stopped being there. No dramatic exits, no heartbreaking confrontations, just the slow, suffocating fade of their attention, like the sun forgetting to rise one morning and me still waiting with open curtains. I kept asking myself, why does it hurt this much when they never even yelled? Because neglect cuts quieter, and quiet pain is the hardest to explain. I became fluent in making excuses for them. They're just tired. They didn't mean it. They love me. They're just bad at showing it. But deep down, I knew love that doesn't show itself becomes starvation. And I was starving. I whispered, but even my silence was too loud for them. They said I was dramatic. But how do you dramatize silence? I stopped talking about my day. I stopped bringing up my fears. I stopped asking for comfort because it always felt like begging. I'd look at them hoping to be seen, but their eyes passed through me like I was furniture. And the irony, I gave them all of me, hoping they'd just notice. But they only ever noticed when I stopped smiling. That's the cruelty of emotional abandonment. It doesn't break you with fists. It breaks you with absence, the kind where they're right beside you. But you've never felt lonelier. I was the light. They blamed me for the shadows. Have you ever loved someone so hard that you forgot what it meant to be loved in return? I poured warmth into cold spaces. I tried to light up every corner of their heart, but they kept the curtains drawn. And when it didn't work, they blamed me for not being bright enough. The truth is, I was never too much. I was just never enough for someone who didn't know what to do with love that didn't come with conditions. They wanted devotion without depth, presence without pressure, a heartbeat without emotion. I gave everything except my absence, and even that they demanded eventually. Reflective question: what kind of love makes you feel invisible in your own story? I stopped recognizing myself. I was always the one holding, always the one apologizing, always the one waiting. It wasn't that they didn't love me, it's that they didn't love me well. There's a difference. Real love sees, real love hears. Real love holds space, even for your messy days. But what they offered was convenience, conditional comfort, performative care. They only showed up when it benefited them. And I kept showing up even when it broke me. I bled in places they never even looked. People say love hurts, but that's not true. Neglect hurts. Being forgotten hurts. Giving your soul and being met with silence, that's what leaves scars. I remember sitting beside them and feeling miles away. I remember speaking and wondering if my words dissolved mid-air. I remember needing them and receiving nothing but echoes. This is the wound that doesn't bleed. It festers. It changes you. Until one day, you stop asking to be seen. You stop hoping to be held. You just become the background of your own life because someone made you believe that's all you're worth. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't asking for the impossible. I was just asking to matter in a place where I was already giving everything I had. They said I was heavy to hold, but that's only because I carried both my pain and their absence. And now I know love shouldn't feel like being forgotten. The moment you realize what you were really asking for. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for what they could never give. As Nayyirah Waheed said, the right people hear you differently. You're not too much when you're being understood. You were asking to be felt, not just touched. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for connection, a soul-level gaze, a real pause, a hand that didn't just hold yours but held you. You weren't begging for gifts or grandeur. You were pleading for presence, a response that didn't feel automated, a look that didn't skip past your ache. You weren't craving attention. You were starving for intention. All your life, you were told you were too needy. But the truth? You were just brave enough to need something real. You were asking to be understood in your silence. Some people only listen to respond, but you were asking for someone to hear your silence. The way your voice cracked when you said, "I'm fine." The way your eyes dimmed when they looked away. The way your laugh tried to cover the shiver in your chest. You weren't asking for drama. You were asking for someone to read between the lines, to decode the language of your pain. You were never asking for perfect words, just for someone to notice when your soul was slipping away quietly. You were asking for someone who would stay through the fire. You weren't difficult. You were just real. And real love comes with edges and embers. You weren't asking for a fairy tale. You were asking for someone who wouldn't run at the first thunder, for someone who could sit in the storm with you without needing the sky to be blue all the time. But they mistook your healing for heaviness. They mistook your scars for baggage. You weren't asking them to fix you, only to stand beside you while you fixed yourself. But they chose escape. They chose easy, and you were always worth the heart. You were asking for a safe place to rest your tired heart. You weren't asking for perfection, just safety, to be held without judgment, to be loved without needing to explain your worth, to be embraced without conditions. You were asking for what you were willing to give. You were asking for a place to be seen and not just looked at, to be heard even in your silence, to be held even in your anger. But they couldn't give that, not because you asked for too much, but because they offered so little. They heard your request through the filter of their insecurity. They couldn't love you deeply because they were terrified of depth. You asked them to meet you at the core, but they were still hiding behind the walls of their unhealed wounds. So they called your needs overwhelming. They called your love intense. They called your longing too much. But every word was a projection, a reflection of what they couldn't offer, not of what you didn't deserve. It wasn't too much, it was just too honest. What you were asking for wasn't extreme, it was raw, it was honest, it was human. You asked for real conversations, not shallow replies, for honest affection, not scripted gestures, for presence, not just proximity. You weren't too much, you were clear, and clarity scares those who only know how to hide. Are you asking for too much? Or are you just finally asking for what you truly deserve? When your heart finally starts to understand the silence. Sometimes silence says everything you were afraid to hear. The words you don't say are often louder than the ones you do. Silence was their answer, and it was loud enough to break you. They stopped texting back, stopped showing up with interest, stopped asking how your day was. And in that absence, you heard everything. Silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it screams rejection. It whispers, "You're not worth the effort." And that whisper can echo louder than 1,000 arguments. You weren't asking for attention every second. You were just hoping someone would notice when you disappeared. But they didn't. And that silence, it broke you more than their words ever could. You realized you were talking to a wall dressed like a person. You tried, again and again. You explained your heart with trembling hands. You laid your soul on the table, but they just stared, unmoved, unchanged, unwilling, and slowly, you stopped trying to be understood because being met with silence taught you the truth. You were speaking a language they never wanted to learn. It wasn't a lack of words on your part. It was a lack of willingness on theirs. They weren't deaf. They just didn't care enough to listen. You were holding conversations with their absence. You rehearsed every sentence before you hit send. You stayed awake waiting for replies that never came. You blamed yourself for the quiet, as if your worth depended on a notification. You kept asking, "Am I being too sensitive?" Maybe I should stop expecting so much. But the truth was simpler. You were expecting basic decency, and they couldn't even give you that. So you began to fill in their silence with your own doubts. You answered their lack of love with overthinking. You held imaginary conversations just to feel like you mattered. But eventually, the silence became your answer. You mistook their indifference for emotional distance. You thought maybe they were going through something. Maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe they just needed space. So you gave them all the space they needed and watched them use it to walk away. You weren't the problem. You were the placeholder, the comfort they used until they found something easier, quieter, less complicated. You kept defending them in your mind until you realized you were just making excuses for someone who never even showed up to begin with. Silence doesn't always mean strength. Sometimes it means cowardice. They didn't want to face you, didn't want to say, "I'm not capable of loving you the way you need." So they ghosted, vanished, with no explanation, no closure. But silence is its own kind of answer, and it often means, "I didn't care enough to be honest." Or worse, "I was afraid of the truth, so I left you alone to figure it out yourself." You deserved words. You deserved clarity. But all you got was absence. And in that emptiness, you were forced to create your own healing. You finally stopped waiting for a reply that was never coming. There comes a moment, a sacred, quiet moment, when your heart stops asking. It stops reaching, stops pleading, stops explaining. And in that silence, you finally hear your own voice again, the one that says, "You didn't deserve this." You realize that someone who truly cares would never leave you wondering, never leave you checking your phone at 2 a.m., never leave you writing closure in your own handwriting. And in that silence, you find strength. You begin to unlearn the idea that love has to hurt to be real. How many times will you let silence speak louder than your own self-worth? Why you kept holding on even when it hurt? Sometimes we hold on not because we're strong, but because we're afraid to start over. As R.H. Sin said, "You were never too much. They were just too little." You believed in their potential, not their reality. You saw the best in them, not the version they were, but the version you hoped they could be. You clung to glimpses of kindness, moments of connection, the rare times they showed you they cared. You said to yourself, "I've seen their heart. I know it's in there somewhere." And you stayed longer than you should have because you were loving their potential, not their patterns. You confused emotional investment with emotional safety. You spent so much time pouring into them that you forgot to ask yourself, are they pouring anything back into me? Love shouldn't feel like a debt you're constantly trying to repay. You shouldn't feel like a beggar, starving for scraps of affection, hoping today will be the day they see your worth. But you stayed because starting over felt scarier than staying stuck. Because you mistook history for harmony. You told yourself, "I've come this far. I can't just walk away now." But every day you stayed, you walked a little further away from yourself. You thought endurance was a measure of love. You believed that the more pain you endured, the more it meant. You thought love was about sacrifice, even when it was only you who kept sacrificing. You believed in holding on. You believed in fighting for people. You thought, if I just love harder, maybe they'll finally understand. But love isn't a test. It's not something you earn through suffering. It's not meant to be proved. It's meant to be felt. You were caught in the loop of maybe tomorrow. Every time they disappointed you, you found a reason to stay. Maybe tomorrow they'll call. Maybe next week they'll change. Maybe if I give it one more chance. But maybe became a cage. Hope became a leash. And you didn't realize you were dragging yourself through a forest of thorns, calling it love. You kept holding on, not because it was good, but because letting go felt like failure. You were loyal to a version of them that never showed up. You weren't in love with them. You were in love with the idea of them. The version who would finally say, I get it, I'm sorry, I'll do better. But that version only lived in your imagination, and so you kept showing up for someone who wouldn't even meet you halfway. You convinced yourself that letting go would mean giving up. But staying wasn't strength, it was self-neglect dressed as loyalty. You were loyal to your hope, but that hope kept hurting you. You needed closure, but you needed healing even more. You kept waiting for a goodbye, a reason, an explanation. You wanted answers to questions that had already been answered by actions. And yet, you waited because it felt unfinished, because walking away without a final word felt wrong. But healing doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes the silence is the closure. Sometimes you are the one who has to say, this is enough. You may never get the apology. You may never hear the truth, but you can still choose to walk away with your dignity intact. Letting go wasn't giving up. It was finally choosing you. You didn't lose them. They lost someone who would have done anything to make it work. Someone who stayed through silence, through distance, through every emotional bruise. You held on for so long because you had a beautiful heart. But now, it's time to hold that same heart with the care you kept giving away. Letting go doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally understood that your love is too sacred to be wasted on someone who never saw its worth. Are you holding on because they're right for you, or because you're afraid of being alone, finding the strength to walk away and reclaim your life? Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go. You were brave enough to love, now be brave enough to let go. The moment you realized you deserved more. There comes a moment, quiet and unexpected, when the weight of staying becomes heavier than the fear of leaving. That moment when you look in the mirror and see the truth. You deserve someone who chooses you every day, who doesn't make you question your worth, who holds you like a treasure, not an option. It's not about bitterness or regret. It's about recognizing your own value and honoring the love you've been denying yourself. Burning the bridges that led to pain. Walking away means lighting a fire under your past and watching it burn away the chains that bound you. It's painful. Yes, the ashes sting. But from that fire rises your freedom. You clear the smoke and see the open sky again. And for the first time in a long time, you breathe deep. It's the end of a chapter where love was a battlefield and the beginning of a new one, where love is gentle, healing, and kind, taking the first steps into your new path. You don't have to have it all figured out. The first steps might feel shaky, uncertain, even lonely, but every step forward is a declaration that you will no longer settle for less than you deserve. You begin to rebuild, your dreams, your self-worth, your hope. It's not easy, but it's necessary, because healing isn't a straight road. It's a journey through winding paths that leads you back to you. Allowing yourself to heal and grow. You give yourself permission to grieve, to cry, to feel angry, to feel lost, but you also give yourself permission to heal, to grow stronger from the scars left behind, to believe in love again, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that lifts you up, makes you whole. Your heart is resilient, wiser now, but still open, ready to receive the kind of love that honors you, that respects you, that never asks you to question your worth. Embracing the freedom of self-love, you realize that the love you were searching for was inside you all along. The freedom to say no, the power to walk away, the courage to put yourself first. Self-love isn't selfish, it's survival. It's the radical act of reclaiming your soul from the hands of those who never deserved it. The promise you make to yourself. Today, you promise yourself this: to never settle again, to never dim your light for anyone else, to be your own hero, your own safe place, your own home. You were never too much. You were simply asking the wrong person, and now you're asking the right one, yourself. What would your life look like if you chose yourself first every single day? I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking for what I deserved. One day, someone will thank me for the way I love, but until then, I will thank myself for surviving. The quiet power of survival. This isn't a triumphant cheer or a loud celebration. It's a quiet moment, a soft breath after the storm. Survival isn't about being unbreakable. It's about standing up again and again, even when you feel like falling apart. You survive the nights of silence, the weight of absence, the pain of being too much for someone who couldn't love you fully. That survival is your strength, a strength only those who have walked through fire truly understand. Owning your story and your heart. You loved deeply. You cared recklessly. You stayed too long, not because you were weak, but because your heart believed in a love that never stopped hoping. You were never too much. You were just exactly who you needed to be. Raw, real, vulnerable, and fiercely alive. And now you own that story. Every tear, every scar, every moment of doubt, they're all part of the masterpiece that is you. Turning pain into purpose. Your past doesn't define you, it refines you. The heartbreak, the betrayals, the loneliness, they become the fuel for your growth. You learn to love yourself with the same intensity you once reserved for others. You find beauty in your scars, power in your vulnerability, and wisdom in your wounds. A new chapter of self-love and respect. You begin to rewrite the rules of your heart, no longer tolerating less than you deserve, no longer dimming your light to make others comfortable. You become the author of your own love story, one where respect, kindness, and authenticity lead the way. This new chapter is not about perfection. It's about honesty with yourself and with the world. It's about embracing your worth and never settling for anything less than true, wholehearted love. Gratitude for the journey. You may not have the love story you dreamed of, but you have something even more precious. The love you give yourself every day. Gratitude for surviving, for growing, for healing. You thank yourself for the patience to wait, the courage to leave, and the hope to keep believing. Because one day, someone will thank you for the way you love. But until then, you are enough, just as you are. how can you honor your own journey and love yourself more fully today? 2. The ones still blaming themselves. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. A message for the silent struggler. If you're still blaming yourself, still replaying the words they never said, still trying to understand why you weren't enough for someone who barely knew how to love themselves, please listen carefully. It was never you. You were never too emotional. You were never too needy. You were never too much. You were just too honest for people who run from truth. Too open for people who live behind walls. Too loving for those who mistake control for care. You were never the problem. They just weren't capable of holding someone like you. Breaking the cycle of self-blame. The silence you endured wasn't a reflection of your worth. It was their fear, their limits, their inability to hold space. You carried the weight of absence and rejection, but that burden never belonged to you. Now, it's time to stop blaming yourself for their shortcomings and fears. Finding freedom in truth. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. And now, with that truth, you have a chance to ask yourself, what do I truly deserve? How do I want to be loved? Who deserves the real me? This is your moment to step into the light, to rewrite your story, and to give yourself the love you've always needed. A new beginning. You are not broken. You are not less than. You are a soul worthy of deep, real, unconditional love. So breathe, heal, rise. Because the right love, the love that sees you, holds you, and never lets go, is waiting for you. What will you say to yourself today as you begin to truly heal? If this story touched your heart, remember this. You were never too much. You were simply asking for what you deserved. Don't settle for less than genuine love and respect. Take care of your own heart first, because healing starts with you. If you know someone struggling to see their worth, please share this video with them. Subscribe and join this community of healing souls. Together we rise. Thank you for watching. Your story matters.